Here.
Vice Chair Welch.
Here.
Member Evans.
Here.
Member Hall.
Here.
Member Inverson.
Here.
Member Masad.
Here.
Member Michael.
Here.
Quorum's present.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. We have any public comment at this time? This would be on anything that isn't an agenda item. We'd be happy to accommodate any thoughts or ideas. Okay, seeing none. We have minutes from 2 previous meetings. First one would be our Open Space Advisory Committee meeting on April 17th. Are there any comments or questions on that?
I think I had on page 3 at 62736, trails that will be abandoned and a few that would be made sustainable. And then the last paragraph, second to last sentence, or the last sentence, Commissioner Bagwell praised the EVTC, not the EVTA.
Okay, we will take comments on the joint meeting, which is what Donna was just commenting on.
Yeah, I guess it was
Mr.
a joint meeting.
I am recording on Granicus, so we have to go by each meeting and take 2 motions.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will take Donna's comments under advisement and go back to any comments, questions, corrections on the regular meeting draft minutes of April 17th, 2017. Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion for approval?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any public comment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are now on the agenda item for review and approval of the draft minutes of the joint meeting with Carson City Open Space and Carson City Parks and Rec. This was on May 2nd. Donna, would you repeat your comments so that we can get those for the minutes?
Yes. Okay. Page 3 at 62736, second line down, trails that will be abandoned and a few that would be made sustainable. And then the very last sentence, Commissioner Bagwell praised the EVTC, not the EVTA.
Okay. Did those make sense, Tamara?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments, corrections? Any public comment? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I will abstain, having not made it to the meeting. Okay, are there any modifications to the agenda, Ann?
No modifications, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we have item 3, meeting items. Oh, let me back up. Do I need to call for public comment on modifications to the agenda?
No.
Thank you, Iris. Just want to make sure I'm... Okay, item 3A. For discussion only, update on the department's new organizational structure, including discussion on staff recruitment and the park ranger program. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I'm going to try to keep this one brief so you can focus on, I know, bigger items tonight. But before you tonight is an overview of our new organizational structure. As you know, the last year we did a strategic planning session that involved all of our staff. We surveyed committee members. We involved Chair Scott, also Chairwoman Keever from the Park Commission, the Shade Tree Council at the time, the chair, as well as our city manager and all of our staff. And throughout that strategic planning process, a lot of things came to light. Some duplication in our department, some communication issues, some concerns with operating in silos, and really identifying the need to try to create a structure that worked a little bit better for the department to be able to actively communicate with each other. And a lot of the results of why we had those situations were from the recession, frankly. We had a lot of staff eliminations and budget cuts, and the organizational chart was pretty much what was left over after all those cuts were made. So some of it didn't quite make sense. So all of the staff had an opportunity to provide their ideas and their input with the new structure. Met with staff, had meetings, especially at our manager's level. All the staff also were able to participate in a survey about the department and its structure. So every employee that was willing, and we had probably 95% of our staff, our full-time staff, submit ideas for organizational structure. And there was a lot of really great creative ideas, and ones that aren't completely in your new organizational chart, but ones that we can keep in mind as we grow into the future. So if we add new staff and obtain other funds, there's definitely a lot of opportunities to grow. So in your packet, you'll see the old organizational chart, which is the light blue chart, and that's what it looked like when I started last June. And then the larger, more colorful one, because I'm blind and I can't read, so I provided a bigger one for you, is the new structure. And this was adopted as part of the fiscal 17-18 budget, so the Board of Supervisors has approved this. This is in place, and we've been slowly making these changes and trying to make some readjustments as we move forward. One of the key changes you'll see is we used to have a deputy director position, and that position was downgraded to a park operations superintendent, and we had approximately $27,000 to $28,000 in cost savings from that downgrade, which has all been lumped into park maintenance worker labor in form of seasonals. That was an area that almost every staff person would agree that we were desperately needing, is more boots on the ground, more labor, and more support to take care of our parks and trails, and all of our facilities, and really investing in that, getting back to our basic services that we provide. Another change that you'll see is the addition of the clerical hourly position at the cemetery. Previously, we didn't have the cemetery office staffed on a regular basis. This created a lot of confusion for the public. Oftentimes they're going to the cemetery under not wonderful circumstances, and to have to walk around the cemetery for an hour trying to find someone to help you to schedule a burial or provide some services was not the best customer service. So we were able to add that part-time clerical hourly position. It's a 20-hour position. We now have consistent hours from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday at the cemetery, and then we have divided the responsibilities from the maintenance staff there. Previously, the maintenance staff was functioning in an administrative function and a maintenance function, and it wasn't the best setup for their success. So maintenance is focusing on what they know best, and then we have an administrative person to handle the office and administrative duties. So another change that you'll see in the organizational structure, which is the focus of our item tonight, is where the park rangers sit. Previously, one park ranger reported to our park operations manager, and the other one reported to our open space administrator. I think we've all talked about how much work is on the open space staff and how small the staff is. They are small but mighty. The hope is to not take anything away from the open space division, but really add to it, and not having that direct supervision, but still having the impact of that staff. So we have David Navarro here. He's our park operations superintendent. He was going to talk a little bit about the park ranger program and the future of that. Before we get to that, do you have any questions on the organizational structure, or I know I kind of threw a lot in a little time.
Any questions from the committee? So we don't go out to the cemetery and look for the guy in the backhoe anymore?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have someone in the office to help you out.
Okay. I don't see any other questions, and if anybody comes up with any, we can catch them when Mr. Navarro's finished, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I want to say thank you, Chairman Scott and members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Navarro. I'm the Park Operations Superintendent for the Parks Department. So when this transition happened with the park rangers and we got together and we talked about the strategic plan, one of the things that by combining both of the positions together was to improve the interdepartmental communication between the park rangers. We had one that was just dedicated to open space and the other one was just dedicated to parks. But what we were finding out is a lot of their stuff was overlapping, and a lot of the things that they were doing together. It's also going to improve this citywide collaboration between including consistent policies and procedures with the citation authorities, code enforcement, and also animal control as well. We're in the process right now of getting together with animal control and cleaning up some of those policies, and so everybody's kind of on the same page. And it's also going to give the park rangers the enforcement that they currently have, but we're also working on a book as well to getting that cleaned up as well. And then once we get that all cleaned up and everybody's on the same page and they get the proper training, then they will be able to go out with animal control, with code enforcement, and also be able to write citations. And a couple other things, we're also going to be implementing outreach and educational opportunities with a focus on youth in the community, and then improve communications with the Sheriff's Office, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and also other enforcement agencies as well. My hope and my goal is not to take away from anything from the open space division. We do have about 8,000 acres of property from between open space and parkland that with the two park rangers, we got to figure out a way to cover all that. So, and before, it was a heavy burden on our open space manager to cover all of his areas, and there was times where our park ranger, who was dedicated to the parks at the time, would be helping him out in the canyons, helping him out when he had other things that he was dealing with outside the city limits. So when we got together and talked about it, our hope is that we can still cover those areas. And in constant communication with the open space administrator as well, we will still have an idea of what's going on out there and things that will need to be covered and addressed. My hope is that nothing is going to be missed. Everything's going to continue as is. But now we're going to have to figure out the schedule now, how to get both the park rangers on the same page. With that, I also want to continue to work with the educational piece as well. I think we're going to have a good opportunity here in the winter months to get out to the schools and not only talk about some of our parks, but also some of the programs that we will have as well. And they've talked about a junior ranger program, and they've talked about doing nature hikes and walks and stuff like that. We don't have everything mapped out yet, but there's some good discussion going on right now between myself, the park rangers, and also the open space administrator. As well. And then we will continue to also work with the volunteer groups. I know that the Open Space Park Ranger has done some Eagle Scout projects. I want to continue that. And we've also had some other volunteer groups approach us as well that wanted to do some projects not only within our parks, but also in the open space areas as well. So I want to continue to foster that, and I want our park rangers to be the leads, because that's what they should be. They should be the leads on these types of programs. And as everybody knows, we bring in a lot of special events into the city here: epic rides, rockabilly riots, just to name a few. And when those events come into town, our park rangers are out during those times, and usually are the first contact when things go wrong at those events. So we need to make sure that they're both cross-trained for events like that. So they'll be covering all that in our new goal moving forward here. So again, it's going to be an interesting challenge with the 2 park rangers they have, but I think that they're both eager and excited, and so we look forward to the challenge and what's going to happen with this program here. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Dave. Any questions? Yes, Marge.
Is Open Space still going to be paying for one full-time ranger?
Yeah, currently now they are paying for a full-time ranger, yes, and that's going to stay the same.
Other questions? Just, we're very glad to have you here tonight, and I'm sure you've heard how possessive we are of our budget and our people. And so we, we're looking forward to the expanded opportunities and recognize, I think, that working together, the Rangers can potentially, be a little more efficient. But at the same time, historically, we've had some concerns over shared positions where we felt like open space didn't necessarily see the full benefit of what was originally, anticipated, and that's behind us. But I'd mention it for what it's worth, just so you know, we're very interested and very supportive of what's going on in Parks and Rec as well as open space, but we want to make sure that our limited staff isn't too stretched too thin. We've been very, very pleased with what Mr. Costello has done. And hopefully this gives him an opportunity to continue to serve open space and also a little bit of a career path or potential in the organization that might be more difficult in just the open space area. So we thank you for your information presentation. I invite you here anytime. And we're here to support both programs, but we really appreciate what we can see. How it can kind of expand the public education, for example, would be great. If we can keep the kids trained and feeling, getting the right step on open space and parks and how to live in the outdoors and how to treat them right, those are, to me, are pretty important elements. At the same time, we've got more job than we have personnel, whether you have 1 or 2. So it's a balancing challenge, but we want to be part of the solution, so we thank you for what you're outlining and look forward to kind of monitoring and making sure that if things need to be tweaked or adjusted in the future, they can be.
Well, thank you, Chairman Scott, and like I said, I look forward to the challenge. I also got, just on a side note, I had some pressure like for my younger son. I took him out one time and introduced him to Ranger Costello, and my son wants to be like a park ranger. We visit some of the national parks, and the first thing he said to me was like, "Dad, he has a really cool truck." And I was like, well, when you're a park ranger, you get to drive those things. It's like, I want to be a park ranger. So I have a vested interest in it as well, like personally, but also I do understand like the importance of open space, and I want to keep that and not take anything away from it. So thank you. Yep.
We expect those trucks to last 20 years.
We'll do our best.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Joanne.
So how is it coordinated then, the needs of open space, identified by, Ann and Lindsay and that staff? How is it coordinated back to you? And how do we make sure it gets taken care of?
Okay, that's a good question. So when I first sat down with Ranger Costello and the other park rangers, I had them come up with a list of things that they do on a regular basis, and also with projects that they're currently working on or projects that they want to work on. And then what I did is I got together with the open space administrator, and just to make sure that we're still on the right track. And then the discussions I had with Ann in this like transformation is like you're still going to be involved in this process. I'm still going to communicate with her and go to her for a lot of things in the open space area. And and vice versa, if she sees stuff out in there or she wants to go a different path, different direction, or continue stuff that her and I are going to be in constant communication about the open space areas and also about the open space program as well.
Any other comments? Margie?
All right, I'm going to be a Debbie Downer.
Okay.
I'm nervous about this switch. We had a lot of trouble getting approval to get a park ranger in the first place. And we have I believe it's over 7,000 acres that are strictly open space. And I can see the smaller city parks needing a lot more stuff. And it just makes me really, really, sensitive to the fact that we may not be getting our full-time ranger with this move. That makes me nervous, and time will tell.
Yes, that's also a great comment. Yeah, it is. With having one park ranger, it was hard for him to cover all that area, and then having two, we're going to help him out with that. But we're also going to be asking the open space ranger, of course, to obviously help with helping us in some of our parks areas as well. How that's going to happen, we're not 100% sure what that plan is, but in the overall goal, we are looking to expand the ranger program, not just have these two rangers forever. We want to have, not only do we want to have like a junior park ranger program, but we also want to have like seasonal park rangers as well. We know that probably with two, we could probably get by, but probably not adequate yet, but we're going to grow this. In addition, we've also asked our staff, our operations staff as well, and they've been helping out when they can, if they are in an area of open space or if they're in an area as parks as well, to help oversee those, like those areas. In addition, whenever Ranger Costello, like now, has had any projects or any things that he's needed to do, let's see, in the canyons, and he's come to us and asked us for help for staffing, we have been able to accommodate him and help him out and that's from our maintenance staff. So right now it's going to be like a challenge, but we see the program growing. We see us bringing on more people, hopefully in the future, to help us and help us grow. So.
Any other comments or questions? One other observation, Dave. I think we had some reasonably serious discussion this last budget cycle about whether the park ranger should be a position as a deputy in the sheriff's department. And I think our collective concern was that takes away from a lot of the operations and maintenance and interpretive and signage and other things. And so I think this committee would certainly feel that keeping the park ranger in Parks and Rec would be a valuable item for future, discussion. That at least at this point, we don't really have the need for a full-time deputy-only type position. So.
Yep.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. This is a discussion only. Anything else, Jennifer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to mention, I forgot to mention the recreation side of the department. We did have some changes there as well. So there was some balance in the organization. With that deputy, the organization was really kind of top-heavy, so it was really try to get some balance in the organization. So we did add a recreation superintendent. That used to be a recreation manager. So that person manages that our entire division. So we have a little bit of a leadership team I'm trying to form with our open space administrator, our park superintendent, and our recreation superintendent, and myself, to try to help support each other and then to help support the staff below and try to create open communication. And for me, a lot of the comments that I heard from the department with regard to the park rangers was that there just wasn't communication between the two, and, oh, no, I'm open space, or I'm parks, I can't help you with that, or, I just really want this team atmosphere, and it doesn't matter to me if it's open space or parks, that the whole Carson City community is their area to patrol and take care of and help educate, and I want that sort of camaraderie moving forward. So that was a lot of where that came from, and I think we can do that as long as we communicate together, and the success of this program will really hinge on staff's ability to communicate and work with each other. So we recognize that.
Okay, thank you. And, yes, Jeremy.
Jennifer, when you said the open communications spurred a question. So, and I'm just curious, I'm sure these details have yet to be worked out, but so on a busy weekend, let's say like 4th of July, and I don't know, there's fires in the hills, and there's fires in parks or something, and really there's some level of prioritization that needs to happen. How might our two park rangers solve those challenges? Is it going to be more of a divide and conquer, or each goes to their own respective old stomping grounds? Just curious.
Well, I think that's a scenario that could go in a lot of different directions, depending on where the fires were, depending on the severity of that. Obviously, they would work together. They'd work with Dave and myself in a situation where we have a fire. Maybe we have an emergency operations situation. We might be providing incident command for a fire. We do a lot of support, especially our park rangers, to the sheriff's office and fire in that instance. So if there's a life safety situation, our rangers would be deployed to help that situation. That would be the priority. It wouldn't probably be the events in our parks. We would work with the sheriff's office and the fire department to try to prioritize those things. I'm on the emergency operations group as part of the city, so I would be in communications with them, and then we would all work together to try to identify those priorities. But obviously, knowledge, skills, and abilities go a long way, and if someone has the expertise to help in a certain area rather than others, that's probably where they would go.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Go ahead, Jerry.
It's been my experience of dealing with park rangers that the response time is anywhere from, if there is something going on in one of the open space committees and I pick up the phone and call, the response time is longer than I would like to see it. So how is this going to help if he's now dealing with parks as well? Or is the parks ranger now going to be able to come to open space and deal with whatever the situation is?
Well, I think one improvement of this is you'll have two people now that'll be available as long as they're on shift. We only have two people, obviously, to cover 7 days a week and 8,000 acres. So that's a challenge, but we've always had that. The good thing is now your park ranger can go into open space and vice versa, where we didn't have that before. It really wasn't. It was sort of an unwritten rule. They did provide assistance, but it was pretty limited, and they weren't a real team and working together, only in some instances. So my hope is that'll improve, but we're not the sheriff's office. We don't have, or the fire department, where we're going for 4-minute, response times and things like that. If there's an immediate situation, my recommendation is actually to call dispatch, and dispatch does dispatch our park rangers if they feel that it's more appropriate that a park ranger respond than a deputy. So if there's an immediate situation, the best way to go about it is to call non-emergency dispatch. If there's an emergency, then obviously you go the other way around. We can try to get there, but if our one ranger is working on a situation on the other end of town, perhaps the second ranger can come and respond to that. But that is the reality of the staffing level.
Okay. Yes, Donna.
So are the two rangers going to have different schedules? I know that there'll be some overlap. Or are they going to be exactly the same schedule?
Currently, we have 7-day-a-week coverage. They do have different schedules.
Okay. And I will say that I have in the past called dispatch because I wasn't sure whether or not the ranger was on duty, and it's worked very well. And I don't call 911, I just call the dispatch line. and sheriff's been very responsive, or they send out the ranger if he's available.
And we do have an emergency call-down list that dispatch has, and they do have the park rangers' working schedules and phone numbers as well. So that's typically the quickest way to get someone out. They have radios, it's not just cell phones, so we have different forms of communication to be able to get them to respond.
And I also use Carson City Connect just for non-urgent, trash heaps that I find everywhere all the time, sort of thing.
So if I'm understanding then, getting back to Jerry's question, we potentially have 2 people available to respond
Where you had one before.
where we had one, and a greater portion of the week is covered with somebody on duty at that point in time.
Yeah. In my mind, it's not open spaces paying for one full-time ranger, you're paying for 50% of both people. And in some weeks, you may get way more than 50% of that in an open space area. In some weeks, it may be a little less, but my hope is that that's an even distribution. And we do need to work through that. And I know Dave and the park rangers are going to work with Ann, and they're going to come up with some goals and objectives and really a plan on how to achieve this. But at least they're on the same team now. They're working together. They're actively communicating. They're both very excited about it. And I think it's a great first step to really get, as Dave said, to grow the program. Eventually, I could see us having seasonal park rangers, having them, have inmates or community service workers or leading volunteer groups, having additional support to do some projects and do outreach and education, because that's something that we have not provided at all. I mean, other than our natural resource specialists and our open space administrator, they've really been the only ones doing much of the outreach and education. And the park rangers, that's why they get into that position. They dream about that, and they haven't really been afforded that opportunity. So I'm really excited about that piece of it, especially in the winter months, reaching out to our elementary schools and our youth.
Okay, any other comments or questions for staff? David, thank you for coming tonight. I would point out that you have a report in the staff packet from John Costello regarding his activities over, this was, from the last 3 months, but just so you know the kinds of things that he's been doing. Okay, on this item, is there any public comment? Okay, we'll close this item, and under public comment, I'd like to take comment regarding an update on our Carson City High School position, which we talked about in May for as a member of this committee, an ad hoc member. And I understand that Mr. Mann is available. Could you give us a very brief update so that we can let you inform us and at the same time keep you from having to be here all night?
All right, well, thank you. My name is Mr. Mann, and thank you, Chairman Scott and the committee. So right now, I've been working on trying to get a student to be on this committee. So I'm the agricultural science teacher and the FFA advisor at Carson High School, and I also teach environmental science for the general science department. Right now, the student that I have my eye on to hopefully get here, she was going to be here tonight, but she had tennis practice, and she's also going to be competing in our state soils CDE, or career development event for FFA, next week. So she's a little busy with some of the things, but her name is Maritza Filson, is a student that I'm hopefully going to be able to send up to you guys, and she's able to hopefully be on this committee. So do you guys have any questions or anything else that you guys would like to know?
Any comments, questions? I think Alan Welch, our vice chairman, is the focal point, the contact point. So if anything comes up, feel free to work with staff and work with Alan.
Right.
Any staff comments?
The comment, Ann Bollinger for the record. So as Mr. Mann told us more information about the student, Lindsay and I both looked at each other and smiled. A student that's after our own heart in natural resources and soils. So we really look forward to meeting her and working with her.
Go ahead.
When we first talked about this, Jeremy actually had volunteered to work with the student. Is that something you still would like to do, Jeremy? Would you like to be the point of contact?
Sure.
Okay, so I will give you Charlie's contact information. So be glad to have pass that along. And just for your information, we meet every other third Monday on even numbered
Yes.
month. This meeting is in the wrong month.
Yeah, I remember I was writing on
Just so
my
you know.
calendar when we were talking. I'm like, all right, it's not adding up, but we're going to make it work.
Right. So we'll have a meeting next month
Perfect.
rather than 2 months from now.
Yes, Margie.
Does our ad hoc member plan on working just through one school year? Does this, do you envision this program being a person changing up every year, or what? I don't quite, I had heard at one point that someone was talking about it being part of a senior project.
That's a great question. So the student that I'm proposing to be on this committee is a junior currently. So you would have her hopefully for 2 years. And yes, probably that would be part of her senior project in the future. So her background is a lot of plant science. She's actually running my grow area, which is hydroponic, aeroponics, and aquaponics in my shop that I took over a couple years ago. That used to be the auto collision repair program. So she's planning on being here on this committee hopefully for 2 years. So that then we will have somebody on here for at least 2 years, a junior then a senior. So I know this was something that was mentioned to Michelle Lewis, I think a little bit, or last school year, and then it kind of got crazy with my wife having our second kid. So kind of put that on the back burner, and then Alan was able to reach out, and I was gonna call him too, but life kind of happened. And I know y'all understand that as well. But yeah, so hopefully the position would be a 2-year person, a 2-year student. So I've been already trying to put feelers out there, and Maritza said, yes, I would love to do this. So from there, I don't know what I do next, except for just say, hey, here's my student, and be able to start working on it.
No, I think that's great. We had talked in May about the concern with the short window, and so I very much appreciate the idea of having some continuity and giving the student a chance to really get his or her, feet on the ground and be an active member. We're going to be very open to their ideas and their suggestions, and hopefully it'll be a good learning experience for them. So, and I guess, my thought would be coordinate with staff, but bring her to the next meeting and we'll get her going.
Alrighty. Yeah, tennis should be finished at the end of this month. So that will open up her schedule for sure.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Mann? Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you guys.
Thanks for your efforts. Okay, any public comments on the public comments? Can't do that? No, okay. I stand corrected. Okay, item 3B, for discussion only, Conservation Easements 101. Discussion on the use of conservation easements as a land protection tool and the process of creating a conservation easement. Ann, you want to introduce this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, with me at the table is Ms. Alicia Raban. She will walk us through the presentation. Also joining us tonight in the audience is Heather with NDF, and she will be brought forward in the next item, in the next couple items as we talk about potential future conservation easements. But I wanted to start here with Conservation Easements 101. To step back from some of the work that we've been discussing over the last couple meetings and last couple years, and really have an introduction and talk about what are conservation easements, how are they used as a tool in landscape management and protection, wildlife habitat, scenic values, historic resources, and such. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Alicia, and then we can have more discussion following.
Thank you, Ann. Alicia, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Members of the committee, it's wonderful to see you again. I've been asked to give a quick overview of conservation easements before we dive into the specifics with Ann on how to read the actual thing. So I'll start by trying to figure out how to forward the slides. Basic definition: conservation easement is a restriction placed on a piece of property to protect its associated resources. And when folks go to law school, which to be clear I have not done, but I'm looking at the attorney, property rights are described as a bundle of sticks. And a conservation easement is essentially taking those sticks that have to do with development rights and transferring them through gift or sale to a holder of those rights. So the easement holder can be a government entity. It can be a qualified conservation organization. So more on that in a moment. There are four basic elements with regard to conservation easement transaction. There is a legal agreement. The landowner and the easement holder enter into a binding agreement to preserve a property's natural value. There is some kind of financial incentive that is usually not the primary reason that a landowner elects to undertake a conservation easement project on their property, but usually the primary reason is that they are so connected to their land that the thought of development or other changes don't sit well with them. So it's kind of a heart-driven process, but there are also some financial incentives. So in a conservation easement transaction, the landowner receives tax benefits if they are gifting, or payments if they are selling, for giving up the development or other land use rights. It can be a little of both as well. You can have a bargain sale whereby a landowner agrees to sell a conservation easement, but takes a portion of their compensation in tax benefits. So they may agree to sell at something below fair market value, and then the difference can actually be a gift to an agency or entity for which they receive tax benefits. Conservation easements also require enforcement. And the government or nonprofit group that holds the easement is responsible for enforcing its conditions. We're not going to talk a lot about legal defense, but holding an easement is, it creates a significant responsibility for the holder to monitor and steward that easement well in perpetuity. And that brings us to the last key element of permanence. These land use restrictions through a conservation easement remain in place even if the property changes ownership. The joke is that in perpetuity is a very, very long time. And while term easements are allowed for in Nevada by statute, most conservation easements are permanent or in perpetuity. The benefits of conservation easements are many, and these are just a few that I jotted down. It's a voluntary arrangement, a voluntary transaction. Landowners choose to enter into these binding agreements. It's partnership driven. The holder and the landowner really get to know each other well, and the drafting process reflects the needs and the priorities of both parties. The land remains in private ownership. In Nevada, with so much of our land publicly owned, this is even more important. When we were working through the Land Trust Alliance on making some tax benefits permanent, We had very strong support from our congressional delegation. In fact, we worked very closely with Senator Heller and his staff because easements were such a critical tool in Nevada. Most communities don't want to see many public acquisitions or many more public acquisitions for a variety of reasons. And the fact that conservation easements leave land in private ownership, taxes are still paid. Some of the management costs are shared long-term. It makes a lot of sense, especially for our state. The monitoring and stewardship is a long-term partnership. So not only does that partnership exist in the beginning, but it lasts through monitoring, stewardship, legal defense. Conservation easement is a very targeted resource protection. So why purchase the entire property when perhaps what you're most interested in is a stream corridor or related to that water quality issues? You may not need the entire property. And as you all look at those long-term management costs, oftentimes the landowner is the best manager. The ranching families we work with on other easements, they are absolutely the best managers, the best stewards that we could ever want on those properties. And so that kind of leads us to that cost-effective bullet item, purchasing the development rights or receiving a gift of development rights rather than purchasing the entire property fee title. In Nevada, conservation easement legislation was passed in March 1983, and the Nevada Revised Statutes in Chapter 111 outlines the scope. It provides definitions for conservation easements, who can hold, how the rights of enforcement by a third person can be upheld, creation, actions affecting easements, etc. I'm not going to read to you the entire NRS statutes, don't worry. But easement for conservation kind of reflects those qualities, those protections I mentioned a moment ago. They retain or protect natural, scenic, or open space values of a certain property. They assure the availability of real property for agricultural, forest, recreational, or open space use, protect natural resources, maintain or enhance the quality of air or water, or preserve the historical, architectural, archaeological, paleontological, or cultural aspects of real property. And as I mentioned before, in Nevada, the holder can be a governmental body empowered to hold an interest in real property, or a charitable corporation, organization that has as its mission, as its purpose, protecting natural, scenic, or open space values of real property, protecting natural resources, maintaining, enhancing quality of air, water, historic preservation, etc. So that is sort of the enabling legislation within the state of Nevada. If we were talking more about donations, there is also we also need to look at the Internal Revenue Service requirements for conservation easements, but I'll spare you that this evening. So if there is a gift of an easement and a donor is seeking to benefit from taking it off taxes or whatnot, then there are a number of tests and other requirements that must be in place for that. And so this is an oversimplification of the elements within an easement, within a conservation easement document. It really looks at why are we doing this in the first place? What exactly are we protecting? Are we doing wildlife transit corridors? Are we protecting sort of the cultural heritage of a community? Are we looking at specific species, water quality, recreation, et cetera? And then how are we going to do that? As part of your packet, I included, and Ann put into that packet, just a few comments about, interest-based negotiations rather than the whole zero-sum game, because you really are on the same page as the landowner. And so you really are to be successful with a conservation easement project, trying to find that point that benefits everyone involved. There's give and take, but ultimately you want to come out with a win for all of the partners. There are funders that must be considered that we'll hear in a few minutes from Heather Geiger. You're looking at the mission of the organization or the agency that will hold the easement, and then certainly looking at the landowner's needs for themselves, for their family, for their agricultural operations if they exist on that property. It's a process. Conservation purpose, it's wonderful, and certainly on the part of Nevada Land Trust, when we look to establish an easement, multiple purposes make it stronger. It may open up some additional funding avenues, whether we're looking at habitat, at public recreation, open space or scenic qualities, historic, cultural projects, structures. What is our primary reason for being there, and then what are the secondary purposes? What are the additional benefits from developing this conservation easement on a specific property? These are questions that we ask as part of our initial assessment moving in to a conservation project. This is often the part that takes the longest, and for each of these areas, conversations must take place among all the partners. And so some of the things that can be looked at, and I'm going to just give a few examples of each of these. And this is, again, under the heading of, as we move into a conservation easement project, and we are considering the natural resources that we're trying to protect, now, what needs to be in that easement? So what do we think? Landowner, agency partner, land trust partner, funding partner, how do we feel about sort of protected land? Should the entire parcel be subject to a conservation easement? Or do we only need a portion? What is the best use of our funding sources, for example? Land use zones. Should development potentially on an easement area, and it can happen in a building zone, be restricted to a certain area? Why are we going to put it there? What can happen there? Are we going to establish natural areas, buffers, setbacks, building envelopes? Public access. Is that allowed? Is that potentially going to occur on a small portion of the property? What are the means of access? What kind of access? Are we talking trails? Are we talking equestrian, biking, hiking? In the future, are we talking some kind of, hovering? I don't know. It's in perpetuity, so we have to think long term. But under subdivision, that's often the simplest easement is no subdivision, as is no subdivision. Again, question for the future. Would we allow subdivision, and if so, to what extent? Are we looking at special protection areas? Do we have any rare species on the property that needs some additional buffer or level of protection? And then when it comes to these other areas under vegetation management, what does the landowner need, and what is it that we may prohibit or allow? Would we allow cutting of timber? For fuels, probably yes. For other purposes, every easement is tailored to the individual property and is different. So that's part of the reason it takes so long. Would we allow surface alterations? What about roads? What about trails? What about excavation, filling? Are there wetlands? Are we going to allow any kind of alteration there? What about ponds, springs? The list is quite long of items and issues that must be considered. What are our permitted structures, if any? Will we prohibit all structures? That creates perhaps an undue burden on the landowner. Would we allow them in a certain area? Are we dividing it into a developable area, building envelope, perhaps where the landowner can build, the children of the landowner can build structures, or a rancher can enlarge their shop or barn? All part of a very long and detailed conversation. Are there limits? If some structures are allowed, are there limits on the height, the square footage, setback, how they need to be screened? Can you build a new corral? Or what was one of the calls we had about a week ago on one of our properties? The rancher needed housing for workers. And so, which was allowed in one section of the easement. So you're really trying to find that balance between protecting those resources again and the needs of the landowner. And finally, specific prohibitions. This kind of touches on what is allowed and whether or not you choose to call out something specific. If something is, for example, general rural and allows for a campground, or we've had pet cemeteries, we've had other proposals, bed and breakfast, so on, you may want to take an extra step and say, not really consistent. You can perhaps develop in this area, but really these are prohibited. No bed and breakfasts. What about wind turbines? What about solar arrays? It's a very, very long list, and it's very complicated. The key is, can your restrictions and your reserved rights be measured? Can they be enforced? Because nothing should be in that easement that cannot be both measured and enforced. So again, we're back to the obligation of the holder of the easement to uphold the provisions of the easement. More definitions, you'll see, I forget what your specific template calls these things, but there are affirmative rights and obligations that require the landowner, and these are sections usually within a conservation easement. Affirmative rights or obligations require the landowner to maintain the resources protected by the easement. A couple of examples might be requiring a field to be mowed to keep a view corridor open. That could be one example. Affirmative rights also have to do with the rights granted to the holder to perform physical acts on the property, such as building a trail, maybe taking some water quality samples, even accessing the property for the annual monitoring visit. Prescriptive standards are restrictions that forbid or limit certain activities. An example of that might be prohibiting construction within 300 feet of a body of water. Performance standards also often appear in conservation easements. There are requirements for limiting permitted land use activities that are based on achieving a desired outcome or goal, rather than mandating specific actions or prohibitions. An example of this is the water shall not contain sediment, as opposed to taking it any further and setting some specific requirements, specific goals or actions. We're almost done here. So you move into, once all of this conversation has taken place, the way Nevada Land Trust proceeds with our partners is to go ahead and prepare a letter of intent that outlines the key elements of the easement so that we are clear and the landowner is clear before we go to the drafting. Have we agreed on these permitted restrictions? Have we agreed on why this easement is in place? Have we agreed on how it will be monitored and stewarded? So we usually do a letter of intent before we start drafting the actual easement document. After drafting the easement, care is taken to look at existing conditions and character, look at neighboring land and influences, assemble all baseline documentation and mapping to create the baseline report. We record the baseline as part of the closing of our conservation easements. It is the document against which all future monitoring and stewardship is measured. So it's vital that the baseline is right. It captures the conditions at the time of closing. And then we move into the close. Baselines take quite a bit of time to get right. That brings us to monitoring and stewardship. It's vital that easement holders are very clear on the guiding principles, why they're there, and that responsibility to uphold the integrity of the easement. And the ability to sustain those values over time. Each term in an easement has an impact on the stewardship and monitoring. And a couple of critical questions, especially from a nonprofit land trust perspective, but I know also from an agency perspective, is future capacity to monitor, steward, and legally defend those conservation easements. It's looking at what you believe will be required in the future to monitor and steward, and to set aside or raise or otherwise negotiate the dedicated funding that will be needed in the future to uphold your end of the deal. So capacity and funding are very, very important issues to consider throughout the entire process. That kind of concludes my quick overview of the conservation easements. Putting them together is certainly an art and a science. It's very easy to overburden both the landowner and the holder, and so it's important to take time to find that sweet spot that balances protection with landowner needs. And that's a little bit of what I know about conservation easements. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alicia. Are there questions of Alicia at this point? Yes, Donna.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, just generally. So, property owner can take their incentives in taxes. In other words, the taxes are frozen on a piece of property, or they have no taxes?
The question about tax benefits, it's the value of the gift. And the burden is on the landowner to substantiate that value on their tax returns. It's very important that they work with their own attorneys and their own professional advisors to prepare their 8283, which is the IRS form that documents the value of the gift. And so it has to do with how they itemize their deductions. There are enhanced incentives for gifting conservation property, especially conservation easements at this point. So it's a function more of being able to reflect that gift as you would any other gift to charity, as you itemize deductions.
Okay, so when a property owner does, an easement is put on a piece of property, doesn't that kind of reduce the value, in that case, reducing future taxes potentially?
In Nevada, benefits are quite common as families are looking at estate taxes. I was just talking to a ranching family who had, a sad and unexpected death in the family, and they were looking at a significant estate tax burden. The single biggest asset was their ranch. And so there are things that can be done to bring the value down. An easement value is determined through qualified appraisal. It is the difference in the value of land before an easement is placed. So what is the highest and best use on that land as is, current land use, current market, highest and best use. Then another appraisal is done with the easement, as though the easement were in place. Now you have all these restrictions. You can't build on most of it. You must do these things. You must not do these things. That has an impact to the value of the property. And so the value of the easement then is the difference between those two appraisals. And were somebody to gift a conservation easement, a whole conservation easement, their tax and legal professionals will be looking at the value, that difference, as a potential deduction. I am not an attorney. I am not a CPA. Landowners must be sure to find and discuss these with their own folks.
I got two more questions, I think. Okay, Nevada formed its first land trust in 1983. What is the oldest?
That was the enabling legislation within the statutes, and a number of folks worked on that. I think some of the professionals with the Nature Conservancy in international organization helped to get that into statute. The first independent land trust in the state of Nevada is Nevada Land Trust. We've been around almost 20 years.
Nationally, what is the oldest?
Oh gosh, over 100 years.
Okay. So and have there been
Redwoods.
cases?
It's the Redwoods up in California.
So in that cases like that, have there been any failed where someone has failed to follow through with that, and can it be transferred to another agency?
Yes and yes. Have there been issues? Absolutely. Some of the oldest easements, and if memory serves me, might be 75 years old, I think, 50 to 75 years old. I can get you that number. And a number of them have been challenged in court. Most of them, like 95% of them, have been upheld. And it comes down to how well the easement is drafted and how well the easement is monitored and stewarded. Those are the two things that judges have been looking at. And vital that those things are done well. It's not the first landowner that challenges those easements. Typically, it's subsequent landowners. Again, it stays with the land, travels with the land, so somebody comes in that may not understand the easement. It's another duty of the easement holder to meet the new landowner, to inform them as to the purpose of the easement, how the monitoring works, et cetera. So that's that long-term relationship that must be strong. So that hopefully answers that question. The second question was, agencies. In most easements, there is some clause whereby an easement reverts. If something happens to the easement holder, there is a process for transferring that easement to a new holder. So an agency, like a nonprofit, we have some clauses where we might transfer to an agency partner in the event that is the case, that we are no longer able to do that, or to another similar nonprofit. But there is a mechanism for transferring that.
Any other comments or questions from the committee?
I got one, Bruce.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
So I'm just curious that this whole perpetuity thing, I'm guessing that if a landowner that has an easement wants to sell, it's that whole property that needs to be sold, like that property can't be divided and then divided and sold?
If those are the terms of the easement, absolutely cannot be.
That
and
sometimes
that's-
is not a condition of an easement, though? Like, are you saying that?
That would be
sometime-
rare.
Okay.
It typically is a condition of the easement. And now we're talking about the holder must be vigilant, must be in communication to enforce the terms of that easement, to go to court if necessary, if something is challenged, to remind all of the partners why it's there and why it's important.
Okay, any other comments or questions from committee? Any public comment? And do we have anything else on this agenda item?
Not necessarily on this agenda item, but I would like to highlight just a few things. And why is Alicia here with us tonight? As staff, I do have the knowledge in conservation easements, but Alicia has the expertise, her and her attorneys. And so as we talk about a potential conservation easement with the Old Woods Ranch LLC or other properties, these are the professional folks that we reach out to help us with transactions like this. Some of the items that Alicia highlighted in her presentation on item 3D in your packet, I will go through some of those and identify how we use those when drafting the conservation easement, so you can see some of those in a practical sense.
Thank you, Ann. And we do have a conservation easement today with the Fagan family. I guess it's the trust, and so, which happens to be adjacent to the Woods Ranch. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on.
In addition, then the BLM holds a conservation easement over some of our properties, Silver Saddle Ranch, Prison Hill, and Ambrose.
Right, that's a good point. Okay, anything else? Any other committee member? Okay, are we ready for the next item, 3C? This is another discussion-only review of the field tour of the Old Woods Ranch LLC properties. Ann?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back in June, the committee members were invited out to tour the Old Woods Ranch LLC properties. These are located near the Clear Creek interchange, so on the north side of the highway between Highway 50 and the dirt portion of Kings Canyon Road. The properties are two parcels consisting of a total of 130 acres, and they are adjacent to the Horse Creek Ranch Conservation Easement, and they do share a portion of the meadow that is highlighted in the picture provided in your packet and also on the screen. And so since we have not had a meeting since May, and even the May meeting was a joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Commission, I did want to bring this item forward so the members who weren't present can learn about, from the members who were, your thoughts, opinions, ask comments, questions, anything that the committee members would like to share.
Okay, any committee member comments? Well, I would share just a couple of observations. One, it's a beautiful meadow. And secondly, it really reinforced for me the value of the ongoing partnership with NDF on the management of the timber resources. You know, I think as we see fires and that sort of thing, it makes you realize how effective management and stewardship of those properties from a timber perspective is important. Did any other committee members have any thoughts, or don't all speak at once? Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Ann?
And that's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Heather, I don't know if you have anything to say, but if and when you do, please feel free to, address us. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, number 3B. This is a possible action item to appoint the chair or vice chair to represent the Open Space Advisory Committee in negotiations on a potential conservation easement with the Old Woods Ranch LLC. And what this, Heather,
Did we do public comment on the last one?
I'm sure I did, but I'll be happy to do it again.
That would be awesome.
Would there be any other public comment on item 3C, which is the Old Woods Ranch tour? All right, thank you. On item 3D, given what we've heard from Alicia and some of the background on conservation easements, Ann and I spoke, and the Old Woods Ranch people have been here numerous times. We've been up on the ground with them. The idea of a conservation easement has been discussed in many different aspects, but not at all in detail. The idea that this agenda item speaks to is to have a member, or I think maybe a couple members of the committee, appointed to work with the Old Woods Ranch owners and Nevada Land Trust and anyone else who might be involved from a agency or funding perspective in the framing and developing of a draft conservation easement. As we saw from Alicia's presentation, there's an awful lot of details, and I would hate to subject the committee or the public to working through all of those from scratch. I think it would be more efficient to have that process move forward and bring maybe progress report and ultimately a draft easement, maybe preceded by some questions of the committee regarding some of the overall policy items. But the idea here is to consider that by the committee, and I guess my suggestion would be that the chair doesn't feel like he could do a very effective job given the time, his current schedule and availability of time. So I had asked Alan as vice chair if he would consider that, and I've had some indication of interest from Joanne as being willing to consider being a part of that effort. And so with that, I would open up for discussion to committee members, and get your thoughts and ideas, and then, of course, we will certainly go to the public. Margie?
I've been quiet too long, I gotta talk. I think it's a really big task to ask any one person to do. Is there any way the three of you could share responsibilities, or is that even a possibility?
Well, my idea is that I'm not one of the three.
Okay.
But were there other committee members, we could have up to 3 committee members, I think, participate if there was an interest or a desire or a willingness to do that. So I'm open to that if those thoughts are there. Donna.
Let me ask, for your purposes, both of you, working on this, would 2 or 3 make things more complicated or easier? I don't want to put you in a situation where you've got so many people helping you that we become actually a hindrance.
In a brief discussion over here, neither of us have strong feelings. However, with that said, it would probably be easier if we just had 2, because we are working with 12 family members on the other side. And so to have more voices at the table more thoughts, ideas could just add to the mix.
Yeah, that's kind of what my thinking was, and I think that the rest of us on the committee should be able to funnel our desires through the two committee members. And, I mean, everybody knows what my one big desire is a trail. So, as long as we can do that, I think I wouldn't want to complicate things by adding more bodies to an already very complicated process. I'm perfectly fine with both Joanne and Alan representing us.
Other comments from the committee? Public comment? All right, this is an action item. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, before you close,
Yes,
The
go
item?
ahead, Ann.
because within this presentation, I was also going to talk about the Horse Creek Ranch Conservation easement. And so with the motion, there could potentially be comments that are given to the representatives.
Okay. We will, under discussion, be happy to, or well, we don't have a motion yet, so go ahead.
Whichever way you prefer.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, so following Alicia's previous presentation, I will walk you through some of the elements of the conservation easement. The presentation highlights all of them, but I will enter into more discussion on some of those. Okay, so and the conservation easement is attached in your packet. It is several pages in length. My presentation is only about 10 slides. And so I've tried to simplify a very complex process. So the components of the conservation easement, first is identifying a type of easement. And so in this case, the conservation easement with Michael Fagan was an agricultural conservation easement. Alicia mentioned that sometimes there might be easements to protect streams or historic resources. So straight up is the definition of what type of conservation easement. Next in the document is the whereas statements, which provide the basic facts and reasons for the conservation easement. So Mr. Fagan is the owner in fee simple, as Alicia identified that the property stays in private ownership, and for the city it also remains on the tax rolls. In this case, with Michael Fagan, it is 3 parcels, and Exhibit A is a land division map and legal descriptions. Also in the whereas statements, it tells us why we're doing this. The property possesses significant agricultural, historical, open space, and watershed protection values. The next sections of the document will be in the following slides. So first is the purpose, then the affirmative rights. So that is another area that Alicia covered in her presentation, and the uses and practices. In this case, it's Exhibit B, permitted uses and practices, and Exhibit C, prohibited uses and practices. And I will get into those later on in the presentation. The baseline data, it's Exhibit D in the report. And again, the baseline is collected at just prior or at the point of signing the conservation easement. And so we're recording what is on the ground at that point in time, and it gives us that point that we can conduct our annual monitoring on the property and identify if the characteristics and attributes are the same or if they've changed. And actually this week on Thursday, Lindsay and I will be going up to Horse Creek Ranch to conduct our annual monitoring. So it is something that we take serious in our responsibilities. There are the reserved rights, mediation. As Alicia said, there are parts of these legal documents that if something happens and that's not within the intent of the easement, it tells us what we can do and how we can do it to take legal action. Carson City's remedies, the costs and taxes. So in this case, Michael Fagan or subsequent landowners will pay the property taxes on his property. There's the hold harmless calls and access. And again, the access, it gives us the right to enter the property. The development rights. When we were working with Mr. Fagan and likewise with future private property owners, these will probably be the most discussed items. And so I did get into more detail for Michael Fagan. So what it says in the conservation easement, it recognizes that the current zoning is conservation reserve. One single-family residential dwelling per 20 acres. However, Michael Fagan and the city at the time acknowledged that it could potentially support greater density under a planned unit development, and that development rights might be transferred. So we recognized all the threats up front. To limit threats to what we were protecting, we then said parcels 1 and 2 are not subject to the restrictions. In parcel 3, the development rights shall not be exercised. And later on in the document, in the permitted and prohibited uses, it really goes into more detail. And so when we worked on this conservation easement with Michael Fagan, initially it was 1 parcel. But because we entered those discussions of what he wanted, what he had for his visions of the property in the future, and it didn't really mesh with what the committee members believed how we should spend our money. So the parcel was divided into 3, and with 20 acres being the minimum parcel size, and then within those 2 parcels, there are small areas that are not subject to the conservation easement. So he can develop whatever he wants in those areas not part of the conservation easement. Section 12 is the recognition of existing easements and encumbrances on the property. Similar to us, to all of us, we might have easements on our property for water lines, sewer lines, electricity, phone. So similar, there is a recognition that there are existing easements. Section 13 is the conveyance of separate parcels, and then Carson City's right of refusal. So on the conveyance of separate parcels, parcels 1 and 2, there's no restrictions on subdivision provided the easement stays intact. So that's the whole part of the perpetuity of a conservation easement. And on parcels 3, the sale or conveyance of 1 or more parcels separated from this parcel. And parcel 3, I should inform you, includes the majority of the meadow. So that's what we are protecting. The sale or conveyance of 1 or more parcels separated from this parcel is inconsistent with the purpose. And then Carson City's right of first refusal, the language in that section said when Michael Fagan chooses to sell his property, it will be offered to us first to buy. That did happen about 2 years ago, and the committee and the board declined to purchase his property because we felt that our interests were already protected with a conservation easement. Section 14 is about the extinguishment of the easement. In the following sections, the compensation, condemnation, assignment of Carson City's interest, executory limitation, amendment of the easement, and applicable laws. So now I'll go back into the Exhibit B, the permitted uses and practices on the land, what is allowed. So residential use, and you can see some of these are repetitive, but it really defines the future uses of the land. So on Michael Fagan's on Horse Creek Ranch, residential use, parcel 1 and 2, there's no restrictions. Again, according to city codes and regulations. So per open space, we don't have restrictions, but he might have restrictions per planning. In parcel 3, a new primary residential construction is permitted in a single building envelope. The residence shall not exceed 3,500 square feet ground coverage, and no construction shall occur in the meadow. So that 3,500 square feet was determined from the existing cabins on the site. There's 2 old cabins, and the total footprint of those was about 300. So it was determined that any new future construction cannot exceed the existing. Agriculture is permitted. Improvements in facilities, water resources impoundments, agrochemicals, predator control, and recreational uses. You do have the document in your packet, but the recreational uses, again, this is a section that talks about permitted uses. So it says what is allowed, not everything is allowed. So it does allow hiking and equestrian, but what isn't allowed is in the next section, which is prohibited uses, and the ground disturbance is prohibited. So essentially, no construction of trails is allowed. There is a dirt road through the property, so that could be used. So Exhibit C is the prohibited uses and practices. The impairment of protected values, the commercial or industrial use, construction, subdivision. Alicia mentioned subdivision. Again, this is one of the areas in the conservation easement you can place this. Motorized vehicles. What it says is motorized vehicles can be used on the roads and for agricultural purposes, but not recreation. Tree cutting is prohibited except for personal use of firewood, forest health, disease, and insects. Dumping is prohibited. Soil degradation, water quality, surface alteration, and fencing restrictions. Okay, I'm ready for questions, and perhaps the representatives are ready for any thoughts and opinions as they move forward representing the committee.
Okay, any questions of Ann? Go ahead, Glenn.
So when the easement is held by Carson City, then all long-term funding for management and enforcement and any other activities all comes out of like the open space budget?
In this case, every easement's different.
That's why I'm asking.
Exactly.
Like when it's held, I mean, because it's different from what I'm used to, where you usually have endowments or that you are drawing off interest. But here, if the Carson City is owning the property, and let's say you have a bark beetle infestation or lodgepole encroachment in your meadow, who would pay for the forest health management activities? How does that get funded?
And that's a great question. So every easement is different, and Alicia really would express the importance of having some sort of endowment or stewardship accounts. In this case, Michael Fagan did donate $50,000 to the open space program. We do have a specific line item in our budget. To date, we did a cost share project with Michael Fagan. There was some trespass occurring from ATVs going down his hillside, and we split the cost to install a fence. And I think from our budget, our 50% share was maybe around $2,500. So neither the easement nor the endowment identifies specifically how that money shall be used. I think working with Michael Fagan and future property owners, it's a point of discussion on who is responsible for what items. We have not used that account to pay for our time for monitoring the property. Our time to monitor is basically one full day in the field and then a couple hours to write the report. With our budget, I think that is something that we should continue to absorb and leave the endowment for perhaps some activities that need to occur on the land, some improvements.
And there's over $40,000 left in that endowment, as I remember.
Correct. I think that, yeah, there's somewhere around $47,000.
It's not a lot for in perpetuity.
This is Heather Geiger, for the record. I had something to add to that as well. Part of, with the Old Woods Ranch, we move into that discussion. Part of the requirement to apply for the Forest Legacy Program is that they have to be active in the stewardship program, and so they have to have an active stewardship plan, and that's where a lot of that work is coming from, is that the Nevada Division of Forestry has a cost share agreement with them that is funded through federal grants that is doing a lot of the work there, and so that is maintaining the forest health and then some of the other property improvements, and so there's no reason for the Old Woods Ranch instance, or even, Michael Fagan in the future, that they couldn't continue to fund some of those improvements and some of the forest health endeavors through NDF programs as well. So that would be another avenue for cost share.
Thank you, Heather.
Well, I have a question. Just for my own edification, the Forest Legacy Program it's a separate process. It gets enrolled, we're getting a conservation easement on the Fagan property and possibly the Old Woods Ranch, but then you apply on a separate track to go into the Legacy Program?
That's correct. The Fagan parcel is a different conservation easement program.
Does the Legacy Program require that the land be, not just this parcel, but all lands be within an easement of some sort?
It either needs to be a conservation easement or a fee transfer. So then whatever government entity or nonprofit is going to hold the title would essentially purchase it. And so it would be open space in that way.
And that's a great question. Also in your packet is a PowerPoint presentation about the Forest Legacy Program. We are under no obligation to apply to the Forest Legacy Program. It is just one program provided by the Nevada Division of Forestry. There are other programs out there through NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and similar to what the committee believes on what we're protecting on the land, the agencies and the programs have the same. So as you look through the requirements and restrictions on NDF, if there's something here that is a red flag for you and you do not believe this is a program that we should follow, please let myself or your representatives know as we can continue down this process. I can bring information forward to NRCS. They have visited the property. One of the reasons we have at this point pursued the Forest Legacy Program is my belief that what they want to protect on the land, so do we. And for us, it's the more cost-effective program. It's a 25% match. One of the other items that Alicia covered in her presentation is about who holds the easement. And in this case, both of us are bringing money to the table, so it could be either party. It could be Carson City hold the easement or NDF. Whoever the party is that actually holds it, the other party could be that secondary party should something happen.
Just kind of an observation. It seems to me that holding an easement in many respects is superior for us to owning the property. And so the fee simple purchase is not only more expensive, it puts us into the maintenance business, which we have plenty of at this point. And so it also kind of supports the concept of open space from the beginning, which was the intention isn't to buy every piece of property that's not developed and keep it from development. The intention is to strategically acquire valuable open space and leave other properties within Carson City available for development, as far as some of the concerns and fears that were expressed at the time that the question 18 went to the voters. There was some concern about you're going to buy up everything, and we did go to Boulder and saw what they did, and it's a little different philosophy. They do want to buy up everything, I think, but for what it's worth, I personally like the idea of the conservation easement and the joint responsibility with a landowner, and the tax rolls is not being taken off the tax rolls. Obviously it has a lesser value, but it's still on the tax rolls. So, yes, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I did want to agree with Member Michael about this as well, and the funding. And $50,000 is not adequate for in perpetuity. And I think we fully recognize the need to potentially work with like the Community Foundation and develop an endowment or some sort of alternative ways to invest that funding, and then any future opportunities that we have as well. So we have that interest-bearing opportunities to create, ongoing maintenance responsibility, and then it's not just the responsibility of the taxpayers in the long run. So we recognize that, and I think we need to work on a long-term funding plan to do that. That's a great start, but we know we have some work to do.
And conceivably, as part of the discussion about conservation easement, some type of an endowment or a funding mechanism might be a possibility. Ellen?
In deciding whether or not NDF or Carson City would hold the easement, what should we be thinking about in terms of issues that would control that sort of decision?
NDF, I think, would actually prefer if Carson City wanted to hold the easement with the Forest Legacy Program or Nevada Land Trust as well. Just that we don't really have a mechanism in terms of keeping the conservation easement within the forestry division, and so would probably require, I'd imagine, state lands, some sort of transfer in that direction. So it might be better for everybody if it went to the third party. So if we were awarded funding, the easement would be initially awarded to the Nevada Division of Forestry, and then we would transfer it to either Carson City Open Space or Nevada Land Trust if they were interested. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that as far as?
I don't necessarily have a preference or recommendation.
Thank you, Heather. My personal prejudice would be that we look very hard at where it ends up and that it should be as close to Carson, hopefully, as it can be. Any other comments or questions, discussion on this item from board members, committee members? Okay. Before I cut Ann off earlier, we had discussion about an appointment of a couple committee members to work with Ann, staff, Alicia, Heather, whoever might be involved in this process. Do we have a motion regarding the appointment of a couple members to a working group?
I move to appoint Joanne Michael and Alan Welch to represent the Open Space Advisory Committee in negotiations on a potential conservation easement with the Old Woods Ranch LLC.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Joanne and Alan, you're both agreeable to serving in that capacity?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any comment from the committee? Any public comment? Okay, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Next item. Possible action, review and discussion of the status on property acquisitions and request a future agenda item on the Washoe Hillview Properties LLC located in the Gonai Canyon area. Alicia, thank you very much.
Thank you. I look forward to this.
Ann, is this you or Lindsay or both?
I will go ahead and try my best. So your staff report actually provides the committee with updates on two potential property acquisitions. The first one is with Michael Fagan, 20 acres along Highway 50. I have been working on this, I think, nearly 3 years now. And most recently, in 2017, we submitted 2 grant applications, one to the Land and Water Conservation Fund and one to NDF through a different program, through the Community Forest Program. And unfortunately, neither were selected for funding. Mostly because of the competition, not because it was a poor project, but because of the competition. For the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we competed on a statewide basis. There were 8 applications. In the city, I think we did get 2 or 3 for other projects. The disc golf course and the Roscold Park. So the city did win, just I didn't win for this property, unfortunately. With that said, I am still moving forward. I hope to go to the Board of Supervisors next month and to ask for swearing in of an appraiser, in which I can bring back to the committee what the value is, and with the hope for full funding to close on this purchase. Michael Fagan's been very patient with us, and it is critical for us for scenic values right along Highway 50, that whole gateway coming into Carson City, connected wildlife habitat and recreation values as well. So at this time, I don't have a requested action from the committee for that property. Washoe Hillview Properties LLC. I brought this question to the committee last December. That's 320 acres located up on the crest on the north side of Carson City by Gonai Canyon. They're not for sale on the open market, but the owner approached us to ask if we had any interest. And I can't remember the staff recommendation, but the motion was to ask BLM if they were interested and willing to purchase the properties, because they are surrounded by BLM. So it makes the logical land management pattern across the hillside up there. Last month, the BLM informed staff that they were not going to proceed with an acquisition at this time. I don't know if that means in the future. I don't know if that means they just don't have staff time, budget. I just don't have more information at this time. So, with that said, I would like direction from the committee. Would you like more information on these properties? To which we will go through our open space evaluation criteria, in which we identify, are there springs, habitat, threat of development, through that criteria. And one of the things that we've helped do so in the past is submit an application to other grant programs for BLM and for the Forest Service to acquire lands. So maybe not necessarily for us, but we've been that facilitator to help other land protection projects throughout Carson City. Are there any thoughts, questions at this time?
And you list 8 properties in the text, and it looks like there are 9 properties in the oval. Is one of those not part of it?
That's probably my error. I probably missed a parcel number to add on the list.
Okay. And this is, most of the land around it is, well, 2 sides are Washoe County.
Correct. The north side and the west side is Washoe County, but BLM is the landowner in Washoe County. And then just beyond that would be the state park, Washoe Lake State Park.
Okay, and if we were to acquire these, we would potentially look for a funding partner. What would our strategy be? Or how would we proceed if we were to consider acquiring them?
My experience has been with about 7 or 8 different grant programs. Based on their location, some of those programs just would not qualify. And 2 programs through Division of Forestry probably would not qualify if they don't meet a 75% forest canopy. The programs through NRCS may not qualify because they're not agricultural lands. The State Question 1 bond program does have money, but they are not releasing it at this time. So that could potentially be a future option. And SNPLMA potentially could be a future option. However, what I have seen in the last 5 years through SNPLMA is that their focus has been on threatened habitats, so mostly sage grouse. Alicia's still here. She actually finished, did you close on the project? Esquaga?
An initial close, but the subsequent close with the Forest Service and the Conservation Fund is still ahead by the end of the year, hopefully.
So the Nevada Land Trust was selected for funding for a conservation easement on the Esquaga Ranch down along Jacks Valley Road, in the last round, in round 16.
With the Conservation Fund.
With the Conservation Fund as a project partner.
Would these parcels have opportunities for trails, continuity there with Washoe County and that sort of thing?
I wouldn't be surprised if there's trails up there already. I just...
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that there aren't, but officially there may not be. Yes, Donna?
I know this property pretty well because I lead hikes up there pretty regularly, and it's pretty destroyed property. There's so many roads, shooting galleries, dump sites. Yes, there is a trail, basically roads, but I've hiked many times from Dead Man's Creek up and over that saddle and everything. But, I'm constantly contacting BLM about trash dumps up there and dumped vehicles and stuff like that. So, and there's so many roads going every which way up there. So, I don't sure, other than a trail through there, what value we would have in purchasing this property.
Jeremy?
I don't think there's anybody here really that's, and I'm not an OHV user, but I don't think we've got any really representatives here of the OHV community. I could see how this property might be valued to that group, especially if there's existing roads. From the mountain bike community, I'm like Donna, where there's really not a lot of opportunity for, there could be. I'm not as familiar with this property, although I've been up here. I know the road that's represented by the dashed line there. But as far as connection to existing trails, it would be a stretch. But like I said, the OHV community, they may really appreciate a system. It's a lot of property to play around in with existing roads. I don't know what the implications of all the trash and what that means for us for maintenance and for maintaining the property.
If we were to get the property, though, would we be able, would it be an acceptable use of open space property to make it OHV? Because you have a good point. It could be made into a nice OHV park, but I'm not sure that's within the realm of open space.
We have, the Prison Hill, the south end of Prison Hill is OHV now, so we might need to look at that, but I suspect, Margie, that concept is not foreign completely to what open space might consider. Now, Ann, at this point, you've been contacted by the property owner, and you're suggesting that we consider authorization to move forward, requesting the funding of an appraisal by the Board of Supervisors?
Not for this parcel, not for Gleneye, only for Michael Fagan's.
Okay.
On this one, the potential recommendation would be to staff to assess the property, going through our criteria, and providing that to the committee to see if you have an interest in purchasing that property. If not, is there a recommendation that staff works with BLM for acquisition, potential acquisition?
Okay. Is that clear then?
Yes.
All right. This is a potential action item. Is there any public comment?
I still have a comment on this.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I'm concerned about any more acquisition for properties that already showed lots of problems. It seems like our staff open space is already stretched to the max. I don't see what adding more property with really no value adds to how that helps the situation. So if there's a plan in place on how we are going to expand the staff in order to maintain these properties, I don't see the point in it. So thank you. That's it.
Donna?
I do see the benefit of staff doing the evaluation, because then we have definite criteria we're standing on if we were to say, no, we're not interested, but maybe we will help BLM acquire it or something like that. Because then, until staff has gone up and done an evaluation, we can't really say it does or does not meet the criteria for moving forward at all. So I would say at least the staff does the evaluation based on our normal criteria, and then we have a lot more to work with as making our decision.
Other comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that more information is great. I'm also concerned about all the things that are on the table already for staff, and just add some more to it. So, I mean, it's certainly not my call, but something to consider.
What do you think's involved, Ann, in the staff review and looking at the criteria to bring us back a little more information?
It'd probably be a full day to go up there and at least drive the roads, check out the trails. We can do some assessments on aerial maps and other map sources that are available to see the scenic values. Working with the Natural Heritage Program to see if there's any threatened endangered species up here. So at least a full day on the ground, and probably another day looking up the other resources and writing a report.
Have the owners indicated any willingness to consider partial donation or other elements that might make it of greater interest?
I don't know. I have not asked that question.
Okay, well, we don't want to be implying we're interested until we know more, because it's pretty clear the committee has some questions. So we're looking at a couple days of staff time, it looks like, in terms of evaluation. Any other comments or questions from the committee?
Go ahead.
My question is, are those days available?
Not immediately.
Is that wintertime work?
It could be wintertime work. Yes, so we will not have that ready for you for the October meeting. December, we're talking about possibly a joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Commission, but they're not on the market. There's not an immediate threat, so we can just find time in the upcoming months to do the evaluation.
Donna, did you or Margie have a question?
Did you have something?
No, that sounds fine to me. I don't think there's any really rush on this project. And the only thing I say that I know of value for that property, the views are beautiful from there, if you don't look at the ground, and the trail. But I think an assessment is definitely we should do, and there's no rush. February would be fine if you can get up there this winter.
Comment, Bruce.
Jeremy.
So maybe as part of your assessment, if it's going to be, down the road and it's, I guess in my opinion, 2 days of staff time is, it's a drop in the bucket compared to how long these acquisitions take. One idea might be to reach out to one of the OHV groups just to let them know. I think I've only been involved in maybe 2 other meetings where acquisitions have been discussed, and there's always been representatives for public comment. There's nobody here tonight. So just to provide that opportunity, just in my opinion, just so we're not one-sided, because we don't have anybody here that's a strong advocate for OHV.
I haven't been on this committee that long, but it seems like I remember that the reason that we have the motor vehicle portion of Prison Hills because it was deemed that way by the BLM, and we took it over with that being one of the conditions. Am I correct there?
Yes, that's correct.
So again, to to address Jeremy's concerns, I'm not sure that open space and motor vehicleized stuff go hand in hand, but, I guess it's worth the exploration. But I certainly wouldn't mention to them until we know if we can even do it.
I totally see your point. Where I'm coming from is the single track that is in my backyard is getting destroyed by OHV use, and by providing other places, other playgrounds for OHV users provides a mechanism for them to get off the trails that have been designated for hikers and mountain bikers and equestrian. It's just an idea.
I guess my comment on this is kind of on the philosophical side, but something that's been of interest to me all the way through this process, even though I'm not an OHV user, I feel like we as a committee are representing all of Carson City's interests, including off-road use. So I don't know that open space is the right venue, but I would really like to have more information so that we can help channel it to the right place, because I think, like Jeremy said, for various reasons, we need to be listening to our off-road community members as well as the hikers and bikers and all of that. So.
Okay. If I understand where we are at this point, it's whether or not the committee wants to authorize staff to spend a limited amount of time to do a preliminary site and overview review of the properties, the 320 acres that's listed in our staff report, in order to bring back just a summary of how that works with our criteria and their sort of firsthand sense of what's there. And I think, from what we've heard tonight, lukewarm might be a way of describing the current sense of the committee without this knowledge, and also without any idea of if there are funding partners out there who might offset some of the costs, because it's pretty clear that if we were to consider going ahead, I think it would have to be with some significant financial support just for the committee to feel comfortable even to entertain the possibility. But let's take it a step at a time, if that's okay. And do we have a motion?
I move that the staff goes ahead and designates 2 days to evaluate the acquisition of this property, and that they report back to us in February.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any public comment? Any further comment from the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Our next item. Item number 3F, for possible action to approve submittal of a grant application to the Nevada Commission on Off-Highway Vehicles, speaking of the devil, for road maintenance and signage for Kings Canyon Road. Ann and Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. For the record, Lindsay Boyer, Senior Natural Resource Specialist. As you may or may not know, many of our roads were damaged with the floods that we saw this winter, and Kings Canyon Road was one of those. And so currently the Forest Service owns the majority of Kings Canyon Road, but we do own a 2-mile segment that is near the Horse Creek Ranch acquisition. And so from the floods this winter, the road saw significant channeling, as well as some other issues that are really preventing motorized access to these areas. In the packet, you'll even see some photos of people becoming quite stuck as a result of the conditions of the road. So We've been up to Kings Canyon Road quite a few times with the Forest Service and others, looking at potential mitigation that we can do to the road. And unfortunately, the Forest Service has responded that they have a limited budget for doing repairs on roads, and they are kind of prioritizing their monies elsewhere on less high clearance access roads and more roads that can be accessed by everyday passenger vehicles. But because this area is one that is very valued for a lot of recreation, biking, hiking, equestrian use, the mayor and the city manager have tasked open space with the repair of the road. And so what we're looking at right now, because the Forest Service is limited in their ability to help with actually funding the repair of the road, they have agreed to assist with other aspects like the cultural clearances of the road, because it is part of the historic Lincoln Bypass Highway, so it is a cultural resource. So they have said that they'll help out with that. So we're looking at potentially submitting a grant through the Nevada Commission on Off-Highway Vehicle to conduct the repairs on the road. So this grant is a maximum of $50,000. Some benefits include it doesn't require any sort of match, though if you do provide match, that's seen as bonus points. So essentially, this is kind of the avenue that we're looking to pursue to be able to pursue the repairs on the road. Some of the repairs would include some basic road grading to clear some of the channeling that's occurred, as well as some mitigation efforts to prevent the water from channeling down the road as it's done. And we'd also like to include some wayfinding and mileage markers so that when people get stuck, as they have, it's not just folks high centering, there's been rollovers in the area too, so it is a safety concern. So we'd like to improve the accessibility of the road, as well as kind of add in some bonus items to help out with when emergencies do occur. And in general, one of the reasons why the city manager saw this as a priority is to improve access for emergency situations. For example, when we had the epic mountain bike ride this year, that was seen as a potential issue. So essentially, we're requesting approval to spend time putting together a grant application to pursue repairs and mitigation for the road.
Thank you, Lindsay. Comments or questions from the committee? Alan?
On Kings Canyon, am I right that the Kings Canyon trailhead is about a mile up past pavement? Is that right or not?
1.1.
1.1. So I guess what I'm wondering is there really a need to maintain the road beyond that? Is that really used? And the second question is, I don't know how the funding works, but if you repair that road, you may find a lot more cars up there looking for parking. So I was wondering if that can be part of the consideration here as well.
So I can't speak to how much use is centered in the areas up to the trailhead versus after the trailhead, but the access does get back to some of our open space areas and also provides, not currently because access is prohibited due to a historic landslide, I believe, but does provide access all the way to Spooner Summit or to Highway 50. So there are some destinations past the trailhead that users may be looking into. And then to speak to your parking point, that is something we're very concerned about, and is definitely something that we're looking into pursuing, either potentially with this grant application or maybe a separate grant application to improve parking in that area, because it is a very high use area.
Lindsay, it might be worth making sure the Forest Service cultural clearance includes a parking area, even if we can't fund it at this point.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How much do you anticipate it's going to cost to get this work done?
That's a great question. We have been out with the contractor to do kind of some preliminary reviews. And I can't remember off the top of my head what that was quoted at, but I would guess.
Was it 25?
Or potentially more, anywhere from 20, 25 to even $30,000 to complete the maintenance, repair, and mitigation on this road.
Well, that's kind of good news. I thought it would cost a lot more than that, and you were only going to be getting a drop in the bucket of what was needed. So thank you for letting us know.
From what I read, that was just to do a certain section. That was not to do all the way up to Highway 50, right?
Yeah, that was a point of clarification I'd like to make. There would be a two-phased approach where we would at first kind of tackle the first 2 to 3 mile stretch that would at least improve access to the trailhead and perhaps further to our open space property. But to get the road open and passable all the way to Highway 50 would be a part of a second approach, and perhaps that would come through additional funding.
Other comments, questions? Surely NDOT would have some grant monies available for the Lincoln Highway. But
I've never looked at NDOT for funding.
I mean, just a thought, you know, it might be
Great
worth,
thought.
it is a bit of a historic, and they are into cultural, or at least artistic, you know, semi-extinct eagles and things like that. Yes, Donna.
Well, and prior to the Lincoln Highway, that was the Bigler Toll Road. That was the main route from the lake down to Carson City. So, and there was a hotel back in there and a whole lot of stuff. So there's a lot of historic stuff. I've actually buried some historic things I found, and I can't find them anymore, trying to protect them.
Yeah, I think that's a philosophical area we really don't want to pursue. Jeremy.
So NDOT is actually involved. The only reason I know is because earlier this summer they put out an RFP for an on-call for archaeology services, which my firm won, and then immediately afterwards, NDOT released another RFP for architectural services, and we didn't pursue that one, but that was awarded. And one of the projects that I found out in a roundabout way was an assessment of the Lincoln County Highway. So NDOT is involved, and NDOT has a wealth of information about the Lincoln County Highway. It's seen as an architectural resource because it's built environment. So there's all sorts of structures, culverts, the road itself. It's built in. It's a built feature. So when you're researching it, it's the key word is architecture, not cultural resource. Although their cultural resource is sort of the umbrella term.
Good information. Thanks, Jeremy. They also have deeper pockets than we do. Any other comments, questions? Any public comment? Public is thinning. All right, this is an action item. Do we have a motion? Thanks, Donna.
I move that the staff spend some time applying for a grant either through OHV or NDOT to repair Lincoln Highway, Kings Canyon Road. Does that qualify?
Do we have a second?
We didn't really even discuss Ash Canyon. Does that matter?
Let's get a second and we'll have that discussion, Jeremy. Good
Yes,
point.
I second.
All right. On the discussion, Jeremy, go ahead.
I guess I didn't even realize that, and it's the recommended action here talks about Ash Canyon, but this was mostly about, it was all about the Lincoln County Highway. So I guess the only thing I have to say is what's the proposed plan for Ash Canyon Road? I know it's presents a huge challenge, and I believe I recall reading somewhere that the proposed engineer's route was to actually cut more into the hill slope. I'm not sure what's going to be done to actually protect the blowout.
Thanks. Some of us are looking perplexed over here because we did go back and forth on whether to include Ash Canyon in this motion or not. At this time, Ash Canyon, because it was storm damage, is funded, the repair should be funded by FEMA. If not, that is something that we will have to revisit at a later time. But yes, the repair at the washout most likely will cut into the hillside. We lost about a third of the road in one section, and it's not passable by full-size vehicles at this point, which is why the road has been closed.
And we have a motion in front of us that relates to Kings Canyon. Would you suggest that we broaden that to match the recommended action, or are you saying that the Ash Canyon may be covered with other funds?
I believe Ash Canyon's covered with other funds.
Okay, so the motion...
So a motion's not needed at this time.
All right, the motion as it stands is fine. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the committee? We have a motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, staff updates. Working groups. This is Ann, are you going to take the lead in this one?
I will go ahead and start with the lead. The signage plan, a few months back, a firm was selected through an RFQ process that was Design Workshop to help us with our signed master plan, and this coming Friday is a workshop with stakeholders. Margie Evans will be attending that on behalf of the committee, and I've not seen any drafts, but I think the plan is that design workshop will bring some items for us to start taking a look at and make sure that they're going in a overall desired direction for us. The tentative plan, the plan that they submitted in their RFQ was to complete the process by December, but we were a month behind getting the contract signed. So it might be December, but somewhere between December and February. When that is ready, we would like a joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Commission at the same time on this. The website updates are underway. Not fast, but they've started. That effort is being led by one of our AmeriCorps Vista members for the year, Haya, and she started about a month ago. I think more information is in your packet, and part of this is that she has met with various managers and other staff around the department to find out what all our needs are, because her position is marketing and outreach. And I did pass on the recommendations from this committee, so she has looked at those. Cultural resources, this relates to a stewardship plan required on the conservation easement for Silver Saddle Ranch that just has been stalled on our behalf. One of the items that the State Historic Preservation Office has asked us to do is to have an architectural historian help us with the baseline for the stewardship. So we turned around and asked them if they had any recommendations, and they did not. So I guess there aren't too many in the state. So we were kind of at a standstill temporarily. And then the non-voting seat for a high school student was addressed earlier. Are there any questions?
Jerry.
Did you reach out to the Comstock Historic Society?
I did not.
They might be a good resource for that architectural historian, yeah, you know what I mean.
What was it called?
The Comstock Historical Society. I think they're housed in Virginia City.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Michelle Schmitter is a architectural historian here in town. She works with Mike Drews, so he works closely with her, so he's worked on lots of projects with her.
Okay, this, Donna.
Yeah, I would like to work closely with whoever's working on the website, if that's at all possible. If you could send me the information who to talk to, because, I did look at it, and like a week's period, because I look at it regularly, I did see this beautiful change, but it's really just the very beginning, and one of the things that I want to make sure that we do get is when we talked about having that site that explains how we acquire these properties and how much is matching funds, and, so that the people of the city understand how much you guys have all done over the years in these properties, so.
Okay, this is a discussion item. Any other comments, questions? All right, next item, Director's Report, 2017 Flood Repairs and Mitigation, Regional Smoke-Free Action Group, and Board of Supervisors action items. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. Just a really brief update on our flood repairs and mitigation. As you know, we had over $2 million in damage to our entire park system during the floods earlier this year. I did want to let you know that the repairs at Fuji Park are complete. It was quite a challenge. We had Clear Creek breached 3 different times, so those repairs were actually done 3 different times. So it was a labor of love. Anyway, it's great to have that complete, and thanks to all of the park maintenance staff that did all the hard work for that. We did not go out to bid for that, so we saved the city quite a bit of money and didn't have to apply for FEMA funds for that project. This fall, you're going to see the following projects done. Riverview Park, the first phase will be done. That park will probably be completed in 3 different phases, starting with the western side first, and then moving toward the river toward the east with each phase. So that addresses the primary safety issues at that park. But as we move closer to the river, we may need to coordinate with Army Corps of Engineers, and we have some additional challenges along the river. So we'll be doing those initial repairs on the west side first. So that'll be done this fall. Long Ranch Park, we had several paved paths that were undermined and flooded and are still closed, a small section to this day because they're a significant safety issue. So those will be done, as well as the trail between Hell's Bells and Lapeer, adjacent to the Moffett open space property. That was probably our worst location. That's going to be done this fall. They're just finalizing all the bid documents right now on that one. And then we had 2 playgrounds damaged and just need new surfacing, new fiber material to weed barrier. And then we'll get those handled. And then we'll start in on the rest of the list, probably over the winter and then early spring. So any projects that can be done over the winter and don't need temperatures for concrete or asphalt, we're going to try to get some work done over the winter as well. So we're doing that in partnership with Public Works. Rob Fellows is heading up all of the effort on behalf of the city for all of our flood projects. But basically, Public Works is putting out to bid, and the majority of the projects for parks on the ground will be managed by staff in-house. Any questions on flood? And we'll have an update, should be this week, on our website. We've created a tab about flooding and updates, and so we'll have timelines and a little more detail if you're looking for more information, and I can send that out to you so you can check that as a regular if you have questions from the public.
I have a question about the flooding. You addressed all the parks. What about all the open space stuff like Prison Hill, where their city crews are working nonstop when the flash floods clear all the sand and dirt? Is there some plan in place for that?
Do we have Prison Hill on the list?
Also includes the flooding on Edmonds?
So as far as the roads go, that would be on the Public Works list, so I'm not aware of the time frame for that. I can check on the Prison Hill one. I believe that would be early 2018 for the time frame, but I can get back to you on that and let you know for sure.
So Jennifer, the FEMA has done their analysis. They've indicated what they're going to fund and how much they're going to fund, and now it's in the city's hands to move forward.
For the most part, yes. So we've done all on-site assessments with FEMA. We've gone through a really arduous process already. And then with each project that goes out to bid, there's certain requirements, debarment forms, federal processes. It's very cumbersome. So it's not easy, and it does take a lot of time, but the clock is ticking. So we had 18 months from May to complete the projects. We can and probably will request a 6-month extension as we get through the projects, because we just have only so many resources to get this done, and Public Works is struggling as well.
Are we satisfied with FEMA's analysis of the costs to do the repairs?
Yeah, for the most part, they've been very reasonable. Obviously, the longer we wait, construction costs are going up. There's not a lot of labor force because the unemployment rate is down, so your labor force is not there, so costs are going up for that as well. They've been working with us, and as long as those costs are reasonable, so if we get multiple quotes or multiple bids, and they're all within a reasonable range, even though if it's above where FEMA said, we're working with them to still award those projects. So they've been, I think, very accommodating within a very difficult process.
Okay, well, that's good, because we can't control those costs, and if we get good bids and they're competitive but high, if they'll recognize that, that's
Yeah.
great.
And we're doing our best to try to keep those costs down, because the city still has to pay 25% of that total cost. So as the costs go up, the city's costs go up as well. And, these are reimbursable funds, so the city has to front that from our insurance fund, and we're trying to keep the cost down as much as possible from the city's perspective.
Okay, any other questions for Jennifer on this particular agenda item?
I did just want to quickly make you aware of, there's this regional smoke-free action group with Reno, Washoe County, City of Sparks, and Carson City is also participating. Chairperson Leanne Keever and the Parks Commission has been representing the Park Commission on that group, and we're going to invite the Health Department at your next meeting to do a presentation about this effort and just get some feedback from you and some direction with regard to open space properties and how that might fit in. So I just wanted to make you aware of it.
Just in a very general sense, what is the thrust of the initiative?
Creating a more healthy community through, no smoking in public areas, parks, open spaces, especially where youth are active.
Okay, that'll be interesting.
Yeah,
I do like a cigar once in a while.
and that's quite all right. That's quite all right.
With no neighbors.
So, yeah. And then you have a copy of the board action in your report.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Jennifer? And the rhetorical public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Item 4C, activities, projects, and grants located on open space properties within the Carson River area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lindsay Boyer, Senior Natural Resource Specialist. So we've had a lot of activities going on in the Carson River area, so I'll touch on a few of those. We have begun the process of developing a conservation plan for Old Buzzy's Ranch. So working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, they visited the site with us, and we also had the opportunity simultaneously to kind of host a training opportunity for some students and young professionals within their circle, and everyone came out to the ranch and was able to look at different conservation-related factors with the ranch. We had a couple goals identified in this plan. The first is maintaining the irrigated pasture so we can have that green aesthetic appeal, as well as the agricultural appeal. And then secondly, we were looking to identify any areas that were more arid, that in the case that we don't have water rights someday on the ranch, we can conserve those areas accordingly if they were to become less wet over time. So that plan is kind of ongoing, and we'll be working with NRCS to develop that, but it'll really dictate kind of some of the activities and how we move forward with managing the ranch. Another update for you is some of the damage that happened in Carson River Canyon open space. Similar to Ash Canyon, we had a pretty severe washout on the road where a good portion of it was taken out. And so we've been working with Public Works and others to develop a repair plan for that site. And will most likely be us moving the road inward, similar to Ash Canyon, and then creating some kind of heel of that scar through boulders and other materials. So trying to fill in the scar that happened, but also trying to move the road over away from some of the damage. So that process is ongoing. Another update for you is East Silver Saddle Ranch. Since we had our site visit out there a couple months ago, open space staff has worked to do a survey of East Silver Saddle to look at exactly how many miles of roads there are in that area, as well as potential motorized river access points that we could look at closing. So far we've developed a draft scope of work that looks at how we're going to improve the site. The biggest kind of objectives there were to protect the resources, so the river and the riparian vegetation, enhance accessibility by improving routes so that everyone isn't just driving all over, as well as improve safety. I know that's a big concern of the homeowners in the areas, the visibility of visitors, so that's something we want to address, and also develop educational opportunities, perhaps some interpretive panels in this area to teach visitors about the river and its resources. So kind of next steps for that project will be working with a consultant to develop a few design plans to see kind of how it would look to improve that site. A really interesting development in working with our AmeriCorps Vista member, Danielle Hatch, our community education coordinator. She's worked with the Carson City Library to launch an outside the lines project. So this is a collaboration with the library to kind of get members of the public thinking about libraries in a different way, thinking about how you can enjoy books and literature and library resources in a different way. So what we've done is we have set up what's called a story stroll, and it's located at Carson River Park, and there are pages from a children's book called Colores Colores. It's a bilingual kind of picture book talking about natural resources and kind of nature in general. So the idea is that families and children can go to Carson River Park, enjoy a hike, while also being able to read this really interesting story. So kind of pairing natural environments with books and literature. So that's been a really interesting project that we just launched. I invite all of you to go down to Carson River Park at some point and take the short walk. It's only about half a mile in total, but it is a really neat project that we have been able to launch with the help of our new Vista member. Another update for you, Golden Eagle Lane Erosion Control Project. So that's located out on Golden Eagle Lane at the south end of Prison Hill. And that was an area that was receiving a lot of erosion and sedimentation into the river as a result of that erosion. So just recently, as of the beginning of September, we completed construction on that project. And so we were able to do the final walkthrough. There's going to be a few more small updates to the construction that will be completed, but for the most part, all of the mitigation efforts have been completed there. So they were able to build a detention basin to try to capture some of that sediment that's coming down So a few other things to note. Silver Saddle Ranch, we're looking at, similar to Old Buzzy's Ranch, we're looking at developing some kind of a site development plan there, looking into the future of how we want to manage that area. And so we may be putting in for some grants in the future to help with that site plan at Silver Saddle. So those are the main updates for areas within the Carson River.
Comments or questions for Lindsay? Lindsay, I've got a couple. The Prison Hill Recreation Area, 5th Street Trailhead. That's a highly visible area that I think would be a nice, personally think it would be a nice, example and something for the community to really see. Are we bound to have Public Works do that work? Is this something we should think about? We're going to lose another construction season. I don't know that the cost of paying somebody outside to do the design wouldn't be money well spent compared with the construction cost increase between 2018 and 2019. And I don't know if that's feasible or what the background is, but I guess personally I'd love to see that done, because I think a lot of the community, including the whole junior high school, go by it every day. And I would think that would be something, and I realize this is just an example of what Jerry was referring to earlier, with plenty of things on the table for staff, but I wonder about that particular one.
I'll go ahead and answer that question, and the boss can help as needed too. So probably about 2 weeks ago, Vern Cron, our park planner, and I met with the Carson City engineer. We talked about all the projects from our department alone, and including the FEMA projects. And when it comes to design, that's not a problem. We could certainly hire out for design. But all our construction management, from the bidding to the management of the project, is conducted by Public Works. And with their workload with FEMA projects and higher priority park projects, this one just is not at the top of the priority list. I don't have a solution on how to make that happen any faster.
You can hire that done too. It may not be popular, but you can hire somebody to run your construction project, bid it and run it if that were a possibility from other perspectives.
Mr. Chair, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I'd be happy to meet with the new city engineer, Dan Stuckey, that manages that team, and we could talk about opportunities, and I do think it would probably be a possibility as long as we have the budget that can allow for that. I don't see why that couldn't be an opportunity. So given everything that Public Works is dealing with right now, including our FEMA projects, among other things, I think we could definitely entertain that, and I'll work with them to see what our options are.
I can see where they're overwhelmed. And Mr. Cooley, I'm sure, has his hands full. But I just think if that one is funded, the money's there, I'd love to see us look for other ways to make it happen. One other comment for the committee in general. Lindsay sort of alluded to the possibility on Buzzy's Ranch that the planning would include the possibility of water not necessarily being available in the future. The water rights on Buzzy's Ranch and the water rights on the remaining Anderson Ranch are not owned by Carson City at this point. The Buzzy's Ranch water rights are in the process of potentially moving down to Dayton. And just for the committee's information, I'm trying to work with Carson City, Lyon County, and others on the potential for bringing other water to Buzzy's Ranch from transfers of Carson River rights, and trying to do it in a way that hopefully could perpetuate the ability for that ranch to remain as a viable ranch. So just for what it's worth, I mentioned that in passing, and if I'm successful, sooner or later, it'll come here for our further discussion, but just a heads up. Any other comments or questions for staff?
I have a general question.
Go ahead.
This isn't specifically for the Carson River, but is there going to be a Public Lands Day again this year?
Not planned by us. With that said, in the past, a couple years, the open space staff, as well as other staff, so Vern Cron worked with the Kiwanis clubs and the NJROTC. And last year, and they've done a big cleanup along the Carson River. Last year, we had over 200 students, and we did focus our efforts in Carson River Canyon. But in order to have something for them to do, we stopped cleaning for a month, which is not a desirable way to manage our lands. And so I did meet with the NJROTC with a list of other projects throughout the city, and there are some areas managed by the Parks Division that really could use the help of 200 volunteers. So I do believe they're looking at a day in October that the students will still be engaged, but not necessarily a Public Lands Day as we have conducted in the past.
Okay, anything else on this agenda item? Would there be any public comment? All right.
Packed house.
Moving along. 4D, activities, projects, and grants throughout other areas managed by the Open Space Division. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to areas outside of the Carson River, we've also been quite busy. Ash Canyon has definitely been one occupying my time. So where we're at with the repair on Ash Canyon Road, we've had countless field visits. We've been working with various consultants as well as construction folks and public works to identify a good repair strategy for the road. And so through all these conversations, the general repair plan is that we will be again moving the road over several feet into the hillside to create a larger driving surface for roads and moving it away from that kind of damaged slope. And then for safety purposes, we'll be adding a berm all along that slope to prevent folks from getting anywhere near the compromised area. And then we'll be putting in several different kind of water mitigation features, such as rolling dips, to try to deal with the water that caused the washout in the first place. So we've been working with FEMA. Just last week, we completed a review of the area with FEMA, and they are on board with paying for some of these repairs, as well as some potential mitigation efforts. So that's moving along. As of right now, all of the information has been given over to Public Works, and they're working on getting everything buttoned up so that it can then go out to bid. So that's kind of where we're at there. I'm not sure that construction will take place this season or not. I guess it depends on how quickly Public Works can get everything out to bid and that process to be completed. In terms of other activities, there's a short update here about the Carson City Weed Coalition, which is, I guess, managed or housed under the Parks and Recreation Department. And so within the last few months, we've been very busy with outreach activities, as well as some treatments. But we did coordinate and host a free community workshop back in June for Invasive Species Awareness Month. So we had about 9 or 10 members of the public come out, and we taught them about noxious weed identification, herbicide use, as well as the laws associated with noxious weeds. So that was a fairly successful workshop, even though there weren't too many attendees. And additionally, the coalition coordinator, Daniel Anderson, did present some updates to the Board of Supervisors just back in August, kind of bringing the noxious weed issue to light here in Carson City. Going along with other outreach and education activities we've been involved in, the open space team did have the opportunity to go to Carson Middle School last week. We don't normally work with the middle school. We work with most all the other schools here in Carson, but haven't had the opportunity to work with them yet. So we've been developing kind of a partnership with one of the teachers there who teaches kind of an environmental issues course. And so all of us, Ann, myself, Dan, Greg, the Trails Coordinator, and our new AmeriCorps Vista member came and we did a presentation about the open space program and kind of all of our various areas of expertise, natural resources, noxious weeds, trails. So that was a very successful program. The students seemed to really enjoy it, and we've been invited back to do additional events with the middle school specifically, so we'll be hosting or coordinating more throughout the fall. And then just to provide you with some personnel updates, our open space seasonal maintenance worker, Mr. Coulter Thomas, has been very busy this year. He's been doing all kinds of things, everything from cleaning up illegal dump sites to installing and maintaining new signage, to doing a lot of fuel reduction work along our trails, doing a lot of trail corridor clearing, just kind of trying to both reduce fire risk but also clean things up a bit so that they look nice. So he's been quite busy. He'll be with us through mid-October, so we have a little bit of time left with him to complete some projects before the winter. We will be hiring an open space maintenance coordinator, so that'll be a full-time position, newly approved by the Board of Supervisors. We just completed the position description for that, and is being sent to Carson City HR shortly, so we're hoping to fill that position as early as November if we have the right candidate. And then other personnel updates, as mentioned, we did hire 3 AmeriCorps Vista members. So these, if you guys are not too familiar with AmeriCorps as a program, these are volunteer positions. So these individuals will be with us in a volunteer capacity. They do receive a modest living allowance stipend as well as scholarships and other benefits. And they're really here to help us build capacity within the department. So we have a community education coordinator that will focus on building educational opportunities. She's already started to develop 2 programs that I'd like to highlight for you. On September 23rd, that's this Saturday, there will be a sunset hike on Prison Hill, starting at the Clearview Trailhead. So we'll be doing a hike talking about natural and cultural resources of the area and enjoying the sunset while we do it. And then in October, on the 21st, there will be a fall colors hike at Carson River Park. So highlighting the beauty of fall and why leaves change. So we're really excited about that. We're excited for her to start building these types of programs that we don't necessarily have here in Carson City at the time. In addition to Danielle, we also have a marketing and outreach coordinator, as mentioned, Haya. She's been really hitting the ground running on our website and making many improvements, so we're excited about that. And then starting in November, we'll have a volunteer coordinator coming on board, so she'll be really helping to build a volunteer program, whether it's with Boy Scouts or just members of the community. So we're very excited to have all of them on board, and they'll all be with us for a year. And then lastly, just something to note is we did work with the Great Basin Institute Conservation Corps crews, and they did come out to Carson City for a week and worked on a few different projects here in the city. They were working on the linear ditch trail where they were able to remove 52 huge 55-gallon bags of noxious weeds. So we were really excited to have their help there. They helped improve the waterfall trailhead. They cleared the corridor and kind of spruced things up there, which is great given that it's our highest use trail. So we were really excited to have their help and would like to work with them in the future because they did really great work. So that's all the updates for areas outside of the Carson River.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any other questions or comments for Lindsay? Would there be any public comment? No public comment. Item 4E. This would be activities related to trail projects managed by the Open Space Division.
As this committee knows, just a few months back, we hired our first trails coordinator. It is just a part-time position. Greg Berggren has been working with us since that time. And on this list provided by Greg, you can see that we are already keeping him quite busy. I won't go into any details in the projects, but if you have any questions, I will try my best to answer those for you.
Thank you, Ann. Any questions for Ann? I appreciate what Greg's doing. That's an important one, and we probably don't need him to come to meetings like this and take away from his halftime appointment. So it's nice to have a report, and he can focus on trails. Committee comment? Public comment? All right. Item number 5, members' announcements and requests for information. Anything committee members have? Any questions, information needs, anything we haven't already talked about? Would there be any public comment on that item? Okay, no public comment. Item 6, future agenda items. What do we want to have on the agenda in the future? Maybe a discussion, maybe it's a future item, maybe it's a now item update, but where are we on Sierra Vista Lane? Do we know?
Is that regarding the construction?
Yes.
Public Works is the lead on that project, and they will put the project out to bid in December. With
Okay, and
construction
then
in the spring.
we are in the position of beginning to look for someone to do some conceptual work on our portions of the complementary work that,
That is correct.
okay.
Yes.
All right, any other future agenda items we'd like to have addressed? All right, last call for public comment. Seeing none, next meeting. Our date, October,
I believe 16th is the third Monday next month.
okay. All right. And the last item, if there's no further public comment, will be adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff.